By 326 BC, Alexander the Great had already achieved what many believed was impossible. He had united Greece under his rule, shattered the mighty Persian Empire, captured cities that once seemed untouchable, and defeated every army that dared stand against him. Victory followed him wherever he went. With each campaign, his reputation grew larger. To many people across the ancient world, Alexander appeared unstoppable, a king destined to conquer everything before him. But then, his army marched into India, and for the first time in years, Alexander encountered something completely unfamiliar. Not a new kingdom, not a rival general, something far more intimidating: war elephants. For nearly a decade, Alexander's campaigns had brought one success after another. Powerful kings surrendered, great cities opened their gates, entire empires collapsed beneath the advance of his army. Few enemies could even slow him down. It seemed there was no force capable of stopping his march eastward. Then reports began arriving from beyond the Indus River. Reports about a powerful ruler named Porus, a king respected throughout the region. And more importantly, reports about an army unlike anything most Macedonian soldiers had ever faced before. The story sounded almost unbelievable. Massive animals towering over men and horses, their bodies protected by armor, their strength capable of breaking enemy formations, their presence alone enough to terrify inexperienced troops. Around campfires, soldiers whispered about them. Veterans who had survived countless battles wondered how their horses would react. Officers debated how such creatures could be defeated. No one knew exactly what to expect, and uncertainty can be as dangerous as any weapon. Ahead of Alexander's army flowed the Hydaspes River, wide, fast-moving, difficult to cross. On the opposite bank stood King Porus and his forces. His infantry waited in formation. His cavalry stood ready, and among them were the elephants, watching, waiting. Neither commander intended to retreat. Neither commander intended to surrender. Both understood what was at stake. One of the most famous battles of the ancient world was drawing closer with every passing day. Alexander had never lost a battle. Porus had no intention of becoming another conquered king. Between them stood a powerful river, a determined army, and dozens of war elephants unlike anything the Macedonians had ever faced before. The stage was set for a clash that would test Alexander more than almost any battle of his career. This is the story of Alexander's toughest battle. When Alexander entered India, he expected another campaign, another kingdom to defeat, another victory to add to his growing legend. After all, that had been the story of his conquest for years. Every army that stood against him had eventually fallen. Every ruler who resisted had been defeated. From Greece to Persia, victory seemed to follow him wherever he went, but India would be different, and waiting for him there was a king unlike any he had faced before. His name was Porus. Porus ruled a powerful kingdom near the Hydaspes River. He was known as a capable leader and a determined warrior. His people respected him, his rivals feared him, and unlike many rulers who had faced Alexander before, Porus had no intention of surrendering without a fight. When Alexander demanded submission, Porus refused. The answer was clear. If either king wanted victory, it would have to be won on the battlefield. Yet before any battle could begin, both armies faced a major obstacle. Between them flowed the Hydaspes River, wide, fast-moving, and dangerous. Crossing it under enemy observation could be disastrous. Porus understood this perfectly. He positioned his army along the opposite bank and waited. His soldiers remained alert. His cavalry stood ready. His elephants watched from behind the lines. Every crossing point was guarded. Every movement of the Macedonians was observed. Alexander quickly realized the challenge before him. Whenever his men approached the river, Indian troops mirrored their movements from the opposite side. Whenever preparations appeared to begin, Porus responded immediately. Neither commander was willing to make a mistake. Days passed, then more days. The armies remained separated by water. Neither side attacked, neither side retreated. What had begun as a military standoff slowly became a battle of patience and nerve. But Alexander's greatest strength was never just bravery, it was creativity. Again and again throughout his career, he had defeated enemies by making them expect one thing and then doing another. Along the Hydaspes, he began a new deception. Night after night, Macedonian soldiers marched along the riverbank. Torches moved through the darkness. Trumpets echoed across the water. Campfires burned late into the night. Each time, it appeared as though Alexander was preparing to cross, and each time, Porus rushed his men into position, only for nothing to happen. At first, the Indian army responded with urgency, then with caution, then with routine. Day after day, the false alarms continued. Slowly, Porus became accustomed to them. That was exactly what Alexander wanted. While the attention of the Indian army remained fixed on the main Macedonian camp, Alexander was quietly preparing something else, something bold, something unexpected, something that could decide the outcome of the entire campaign. Then, on a stormy night, he made his move. Taking a carefully selected force of cavalry and infantry, Alexander quietly left the main camp. Rain and darkness helped conceal his movements. His destination remained hidden. His intentions remained unknown. And by the time Porus realized what was happening, the battle might already be underway. The long standoff was finally coming to an end. The Battle of Hydaspes was about to begin. As lightning flashed across the sky, Alexander led his men through the darkness. Rain concealed their movements. Thunder drowned out the sound of marching soldiers, and miles away from the main camp, the Macedonians began crossing the Hydaspes River. For weeks, Alexander had kept Porus guessing with false movements and repeated distractions. Now, the deception was finally paying off. The trap was beginning to close. At first, Porus assumed it was another trick, another false alarm designed to wear down his army. But then new reports arrived. Alexander had crossed the river. Macedonian forces were already advancing. Suddenly, the long standoff was over. The battle both commanders had been preparing for had finally arrived. Porus reacted quickly. Orders spread across the battlefield. Infantry formed ranks. Cavalry moved into position. Chariots prepared for action. And most importantly, the war elephants were brought forward. Dozens of them stood across the field, massive, armored, intimidating, a living wall designed to break enemy formations and terrify enemy horses before the fighting had even begun. Alexander immediately recognized the threat. His army had fought against cavalry, archers, chariots, and some of the largest armies in the ancient world. But elephants were different. Their sheer size could spread panic. A single charge could tear apart a battle line. For perhaps the first time in years, Alexander faced a weapon his soldiers had little experience confronting. The battle began with fierce clashes between cavalry forces. Alexander launched aggressive attacks against the Indian horsemen, hoping to gain control of the battlefield before the elephants could be fully unleashed. Wave after wave of combat erupted. Dust rose into the air, spears splintered, horses collided. Men fought desperately beneath the rising sun. Slowly, the Macedonians began gaining the advantage, but the greatest challenge still remained. Then the elephants advanced. The earth seemed to shake beneath their weight. Their trumpeting echoed across the battlefield. Macedonian soldiers tightened their formations and prepared for impact. The collision was terrifying. Some men were crushed beneath enormous feet. Others were thrown aside by the charging animals. For a time, it appeared that Porus's strategy might succeed. But Alexander did what had made him one of history's greatest commanders. He adapted. His soldiers concentrated their attacks on the elephants and the men controlling them. Javelins flew through the air. Archers targeted handlers from a distance. As the fighting continued, many of the elephants became wounded, exhausted and confused. Some lost control. Others turned back into their own ranks, creating chaos among the very troops they were meant to protect. Little by little, the balance of the battle began to shift. After hours of brutal combat, Porus's army finally started to collapse. The battle was over. Alexander had won. Yet victory had come at a heavy cost. The Battle of Hydaspes was one of the most difficult and exhausting battles of his entire career, and Alexander understood that better than anyone, because unlike many rulers he had defeated before, Porus had fought with remarkable courage, skill, and determination. When the defeated king was eventually brought before him, Alexander asked a simple question. "How should I treat you?" Porus answered without hesitation. "Treat me as a king." It was a response that impressed the conqueror. Rather than stripping Porus of power, Alexander chose to show respect. He allowed him to continue ruling his kingdom and even granted him additional territory. It was a rare moment of mutual admiration between two commanders who had tested each other to the limit. Alexander had won the battle, but Hydaspes proved something important. Even the greatest conqueror of the ancient world could be challenged. Even the strongest army could experience fear and uncertainty. And sometimes, the victories remembered for centuries are the ones that are hardest to achieve. More than 2,000 years later, the Battle of Hydaspes remains one of the most famous encounters in ancient history. A clash between two determined kings, two powerful armies, and the war elephants that nearly changed the course of history forever.